Advisory Committee, Highline Art has shortlisted 12 proposals for future consideration. And here we can see them in miniature models. In reality, these are large, life-sized sculptures, competing to be a new gem on display at the Highline. Here we can see Kapwani Kawanga's On Growth. This is a stone sculpture of a fern encased in a dichroic glass structure. The work references Wardian cases, the predecessor of a terrarium, which allowed for plants to continue to thrive amid London's polluted air. Next we see Uplift New York by Margarita Cabrera. It comprises a flock of birds modeled on Papo Picado wings with the bodies of chopped up, confiscated firearms. Here we have Nina Byers' Women and Children. Women and Children is a fountain composed of generic found bronze sculptures from various secondary markets. The fountain water streams from the figure's eyes as if they were crying cartoonish tears. This very cool sculpture is Right by Banu Kenetoglu. She would write each article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in letter-shaped balloons, rendered in gold mylar balloons, and filled with helium. Inevitably, the balloons wilt, suggesting the contrast between a declaration and its realization. Mary Zibande's Old Wars Are Out, and New Reason for Humanity is in. It recreates the pedestal that elevates a bronze statue of colonial navigator Jan van Riebeeck. The statue is absent, and the crumbling pedestal is pecked by red chickens. The man-made pedestal for the glory of men are crumbling to make way for new ideas. This is Hyperspace by Rafa Esparza, an Olmec monument distorted as if on the edge of a wormhole. Hyperspace crosses space and time to remind us the ways that artifacts and the ground itself connects us to the past and the future. Last one of these is Pamela Rosenkrantz' Old Tree, a bright red and pink tree sculpture that animates the tales of a tree of life as the connector between heaven and earth. Which one of those was your favorite? Which one would you choose to be put on display? Let me know. As we enter the Highline, we soon see the art pieces that are already on display. This interesting piece is called Stand Inside Your Love by Raoul Denieves. He makes colorful beaded sculptures Street to 34th Street on Manhattan's West Side. The High Line was used as a freight rail line. The High Line was in operation from 1934 to 1980. It carried meat to the meatpacking district, agricultural goods to the factories and warehouses of the industrial West Side, and mail to the post office. The High Line recreational corridor has a fascinating history of the days when it once ran freight trains. In the first half of the 19th century, New York City had a lot of small railways that were soon consolidated into the New York Central Railway. This and the Hudson River Railroad were the lifelines of Manhattan, bringing goods as well as passengers in and out of the city. By 1863, the famed railroad tycoon Cornelius Commodore Vanderbilt had acquired control of the Hudson River Railroad and would merge it with the New York Central Railroad, forming the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad in 1869. The latter grew into the massive New York Central system by the early 20th century, stretching from New York City across the Midwest to Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, and numerous other cities. Trains were traveling from Albany all the way down the west side of Manhattan along the Hudson River. During 18 truck yard before becoming the eastbound exit of the Holland Tunnel, which is what it remains today. A guide to New York City called the space a circular wasteland and commented, "Our ancestors preserved many a New York treasure, but blew it here." Although there are many architects interested in remodeling the park into a new and analog of a railroad to become Prince of a Park. Landscape architecture firm James Cornerfield Operations, Design Studio, Diller Scofidio, plus Renfro, and planting designer Pierre Odouf were selected as the team to transform the High Line. In 2005, the architects presented their first designs of the new and improved High Line at MoMA. The friends of the High Line were very savvy this whole way. They had built so much intrigue, interest, and buzz. Construction began on Phase 1 in April 2006, with Mayor Bloomberg presiding over the ceremony. They began removing tracks, cataloging everything, restoring the tracks and other debris. They were also taking careful notice of what was on the High Line at that point, which was a bunch of wild plant growth. Some of these things found on the track would be reused and reincorporated into the park. There are some sections today that look just like it would have looked abandoned 30 years ago. The landscaping is one of the biggest draws of the High Line. It reflects the natural landscape that developed after decades of disuse. On June 9th, 2009, the first section of the High Line opened to the public from Gans Fork to 20th Street. High Line Art was founded in 2009 and continues every year to commission and produce artworks on and around the High Line. With Section 2 of the High Line, 20th to 30th Streets, opening to the public 2 years later, on June 8th, 2011, the New York City Planning Commission approved a zoning text amendment making possible the third segment at the rail yards. The High Line at the rail yards between 30th and 34th Street, between 10th and 12th Avenues, opened in 2014, including a temporary walkway. The last section of the original High Line, the spur at 30th Street and 10th Avenue, opened in spring 2019, and in January of 2021, a proposal to construct 2 new elevated pathways connecting the High Line spur to Moynihan Train Hall and the Western Rail Yards to Hudson River Park was officially announced by Empire State Development, a New York State agency. In September of 2021, Governor Kathy Hochul unveiled the designs for the first project. The High Line Moynihan Connector. The High Line's connection to Moynihan Train Hall and other nearby attractions complements our investments in Midtown West, encourages better pedestrian access, and provides New Yorkers with a truly one-of-a-kind experience, said Governor Hochul. The High Line is now one continuous 1.45-mile-long greenway featuring 500 species of plants and trees. The park is maintained, operated, and programmed by Friends of the High Line in partnership with the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. On top of the public space and gardens, uses a piece of industrial infrastructure as a public green space. As a landscape, the High Line also serves the function that a green roof would serve in the city, reducing the amount of stormwater that runs into the sewer system. Because the park pathways allow water to drain into the adjacent planting beds, the High Line is committed to enhancing sustainability in all operations and maintenance. Here on the right, we're going to see an art piece called Retainer. Hannah Levy presents her first public artwork, an oversized orthodontic retainer from carved marble and stainless steel, in conversation with the architecture and design of the park and its surroundings. The High Line is the only park in New York City with a dedicated multimedia contemporary art program that they offer to audiences rain or shine 365 days a year, all for free. They present works by national and international artists at varying stages of their careers, from emerging voices to those long established. Highline art invites artists to engage with the unique architecture, history, and design of the High Line in creative and provocative ways. Through art, we foster a productive dialogue with the surrounding neighborhoods and urban landscape. The High Line has spurred real estate development in adjacent neighborhoods, increasing real estate values and prices along the route. This is an example of the halo effect. The halo effect is a type of immediate judgment discrepancy or cognitive bias, where a person making an initial assessment of another person, place, or thing will assume ambiguous information based upon concrete information. Coming up on the left is Church of the Guardian Angel. Founded in 1887, this Roman Catholic parish first ministered to seamen and dock workers on the then bustling New York waterfront. Visitors are welcome. Now, this area between 21st and 22nd Streets is known as Chelsea Thicket. Here, the original steel train tracks run along the pathway between the dogwoods, bottlebrush buckeye, hollies, and other dense shrubs and trees, a magical convergence of the industrial and the natural. The High Line's planting design is inspired by the self-seeded landscape that grew wild for 25 years after the trains stopped running. Wandering through the gardens, you'll find perennials, grasses, shrubs, and trees that were chosen for their hardiness, sustainability, and ever-changing textures and colors in all 4 seasons. The High Line's aesthetic reflects natural cycles of life and death, and evokes feelings of being in a wild space. According to Pierre Udolph, who designed the gardens, my biggest inspiration is nature. I do not want to copy it, but to recreate the emotion. These landscapes don't just happen on their own. While many natural processes take place in the park, the gardens have also been carefully designed and continuously cared for. Shaping and landscaping requires a good eye and an understanding of how goes further to explore the shifting relationship between history and time. As I walk through the High Line, I can see some really amazing real estate. Can kind of peek into the windows of the apartments along the High Line. Would you like to live in an apartment on the High Line where everyone can watch you? You're gonna need to invest in some good curtains or blinds. So here we have the Lantern buildings, and these are fairly new. I think they just opened. And I looked it up, and a one-bedroom apartment will cost you just around $1 million, and they only go up from there. A 4-bedroom apartment in the Lantern building will cost you $8 million. Now, personally, I think that these are ugly. Ugly. I don't like the way they look. It's like it gives me, I don't know, it sends like shivers down my spine. I think it looks weird and off. I'm sure they're very beautiful. And from the inside, I'm sure you have a really nice, kind of like a bay window. But from the outside, I don't really like the way they look. So I definitely wouldn't spend $8 million to buy one. As we walk through, we can see a little bit of scaffolding. I believe that the High Line is kind of perpetually in a state of construction. They're always refurbishing and keeping up the High Line. Here we get a better shot of the Lantern building, and I'm going to use my zoom to kind of peek into these people's apartments. Is this creepy? Is this illegal? I don't know. But I mean, hey, they live on the High Line, so they should probably close their curtains. I bet all of their furniture is really nice though. Or maybe it's really cheap because they spent all of their money on their apartment and bought super cheap furniture. That's probably not what happened, but it would be funny if it did. So here we can see a nice little view of Chelsea, a cool mural with Mother Teresa and Gandhi. A very cool fire escape, if you ask me. That'd be a nice place to read a book. A nice place to read a book. This is a really nice view. You can see the Empire State Building. And you can also see this art piece that commemorates the approximately 30,000 books from Palestinian homes, libraries, and institutions that were looted by Israeli authorities in 1948. I find that learning all of the history of the High Line has made the experience that more enjoyable. You kind of get the feel of really this might sound silly, but being the train on the High Line, rolling down. Maybe that's kind of what they were going for, but to see the city from this view is so unique. It's an odd sensation of feeling like you're in the middle of the hustle and bustle, but also separated from it. It feels tranquil and buzzy at the same time. This is the 10th Avenue Square, an overlook at 17th Street. This extraordinary window down to the street was created by removing the steel beams of the original High Line structure. The amphitheater, fully wheelchair accessible, is the site of both public performances and daily people watching on the street below. When I was growing up, my friends and I would sit here for hours just watching everyone go by. Here we have the edge, and you can see the people standing on the edge, which is one of the newer towers in Hudson Yards. As you can see, they're very high up. Good for them. I don't think I could do that. As we walk down this part of the High Line, you can see all of the shrubbery and bushes and wildlife. Here we have 57 forms of liberty, an inverted manufacturing tank with a tree sprouting from its mouth as a reflection on the relationship between industrial histories and the persistence of nature, which one could say is basically just like the High Line. That's a perfect piece for the High Line. As I enter this part of the High Line, I'm reminded of its past. How the trains would go through the buildings so that they could be loaded and unloaded faster. I never walked through the High Line thinking about that until now. You can imagine them pulling through the buildings. It's really cool that they're still here and that we can still see how it used to be. Now it's kind of like a market, so there's food vendors and artisans. As I look east onto 15th Street, I see the sky bridge that connects the old Nabisco bakery and factory, where the Oreo cookie was invented, with the Nabisco office building. The building, which is now Chelsea Market, was originally built in the 1890s and was the New York Baking Company, which became the National Biscuit Company, which became Nabisco. The train would roll through the factory, get loaded up with Oreos, and sent on its way via the High Line for millions to enjoy. This beautiful sky bridge was built to connect the two buildings in the 1930s. It's such a lovely addition. Here on the very west side of Manhattan, we have a gorgeous view of the Hudson River and the brand new Little Island Park. This park was built on the old White Star Line pier at Chelsea Piers. If the White Star Line sounds familiar, it's because the most infamous ship in history was a White Star Liner, the Titanic. If the ship of dreams had survived her treacherous journey, she would have arrived right there at the White Star Pier. Instead, the Carpathia pulled in, dropped off the empty White Star Line lifeboats, then went to the Cunard Line Pier and dropped off the remaining survivors. Pier 54 is also where the Lusitania, the other ship everyone knows, departed from, only to be sunk by German torpedoes and launch the U.S. into the fray of World War I. There is so much history here on the High Line and in the surrounding neighborhoods. New York feels so modern and new, especially this neighborhood. But little do you know that it's played such a major role in so many stories and chapters of history. We're about to enter the 14th Street Passage, aka the High Line Building, one of the first buildings constructed during the development of the High Line. The new glass and steel office tower rests on a renovated 1938 meatpacking plant that's not only pierced through by the old industrial rail, but also structurally tied into vestiges of the White Star Line pier we were talking about earlier. We are now entering the Donald Pell's and Wendy Key's Gansevoort woodland between Gansevoort and 13th Street. In warm months, vines cascade over the railings here to form a luscious curtain, visible to the passerby. On the street below is the red brick building of the meatpacking district's last operating meatpacking plant, and the dramatic Glass Hotel. The standard High Line is directly north. You may have noticed these signs throughout the High Line. Right now, the High Line is celebrating insects. Held annually, the High Line's month-long horticultural celebration highlights a different aspect of the park's horticulture and sustainability initiatives. Inspired by artist Cecilia Vicuna's day-long festival, Insectageddon, this year during the month of September, we're taking a closer look at the relationships between insects, plants, and the greater web of life, including humans. While they're small in size, the impact of insects shouldn't be underestimated. Insects play a critical role in the ecosystem, including pollinating flowering plants, acting as a food source for birds and other small animals, playing a role in decomposition and maintaining soil quality, and even performing pest control. Insects are very important to our ecosystem. Plants and insects cover the globe. Together they have shaped our world into what we know today, and we rely on their lives and relationships to survive. Our children and grandchildren and their grandchildren deserve to live in a world where fireflies invoke wonder and magic, where butterflies, beetles, dragonflies, wild bees, crickets, and ephemeral mayfly have a place of honor among the other kingdoms of life. Here we have Evandale de Caresses, a hanging chime of cast bronze bells in the shape of human organs. The sculpture references Zen Buddhist principles of emptiness and fullness. This piece is by Mai Tu Pare. Here we can see the historic Highline Hotel, which used to be a 19th century theological seminary. And as we travel back up north, we can see once again the Guardian Angel, the Church of the Guardian Angel. This beautiful brick building is so historic, and you can kind of catch a glimpse of the beautiful stained glass windows in the back of the church facing the High Line. Gorgeous. We can see that this is an old factory. This factory was completed in 1970 and was used by many businesses, including one of the country's leading manufacturers of tin foil. The complex of red brick buildings to the west, where Tesla now has a showroom, was built by the Cornell Iron Works, one of New York's largest producers of cast iron architectural elements. And to the right is the Williams Company warehouse, a factory once owned by H. Wolf Book Manufacturing Company, which provided printing, binding, and distribution services to publishers. Wolf, which had no direct access to the High Line, made an agreement with the wholesale grocer to transport goods via the Williams Company rail siding. All the materials necessary for book manufacturing, paper, binding, cloth, glue, arrived by truck at Wolf's 26th Street loading dock, and then the finished books emerged on the High Line for distribution Westside,